Hi, this is Jason with Pilgrim's Light Ministries. I'm here today to talk about why I like the NASB version of the Bible. There's a lot of different versions out there, so why did I pick this one? Well, when I started Pilgrim's Light a lot of years ago, it was with the idea that people would be able to understand the Bible for themselves. That way you had the responsibility and control over what you learned about the Bible and how you applied it. And I think that this Bible version is the best way to do that. So stick around, I'm going to go over it. Okay, we're back. So, the NASB version of the Bible is published by the Lockman Foundation. They've had the NASB Bible, they've been doing it for a lot of years now. I think 1960 was the first translation that actually came out. So they actually started before then, before they had the first translation out. They do the NASB, the New American Standard Bible, that's what NASB stands for, and they do the Amplified Bible, both very good versions of the Bible. A lot of the Assembly of God folks that I know, they like using that Amplified version. I think it's a great version. So, along with that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I'm going to go over in the video so you can kind of skip around and see where you might want to be on this. If you want to skip through the version history or some of the other things that you might think are boring, just cut right to the chase, then go ahead and just fast forward through and you'll see the slides where they'll come up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the version history. I'm going to talk about the source material behind the text. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I like the NASB, and it's for basically three main reasons. Number one, it's because I like the translation method. We're going to go over a little bit about translation methods and how that affects how the Bible is translated and how you read it and how it's interpreted. Also, the transparency of the NASB. And what I mean by that, there's special features within the Bible itself, as you're reading it, that gives you automatic feedback as to where they're getting their information from, at least on a basic level. So as you're just reading through there, you can get a little bit more information than you would with a normal Bible. And also the accessibility. And what I mean by accessibility is the accessibility for English speakers to be able to understand more closely what the original language is trying to convey. And I think that's a key and important fact when you really want to look for a Bible to study. And I'm not of the opinion that you should have a different Bible to study and that you should have a different Bible to read and that, that you might want one for devotionals. I think you should just pick one and you do everything with it. Do your devotional study out of it. Do your reading out of it. Those other versions are great, but just pick your main horse and go with that. So let's get right into that. So here's a little bit about the version history of the NASB. The NASB was derived from the American Standard Version. That's the ASV, and that was published in 1901. So a little bit of background about the American Standard Version. The King James Version, the KJV, is probably the most well-known and prestigious version out there. In fact, there's big fans of the King James Version. I'm a fan too. I learned my first Bible verses out of the King James Version. A lot of these modern translations had not hit the Baptist church where I was at yet. So, I do like the King James Version. But that was based on the Bishop's Bible, which was, I think it was 1586, something like that. Out of that, years later, about the 1880s, I think, the English and the Americans wanted to update the King James Bible. So the Revised Version, the Revised Standard Version, was done with British scholars, and those guys got together and made a version for the UK and things like that, English-speaking people from the motherland, I guess. So, but the Americans spoke English a little bit differently, and so we came up with the American Standard Version, and that was 1901. Well, if we fast forward, the complete NASB New Testament was published in 1963, and the complete NASB was in 1971. So what had happened is the King James is basically based on 6 majority text. It's called the Textus Receptus, or the majority text. It's where we get a lot of the text. But over the years and over time, the scholarship had gone up, and what we know about the Bible had gone up, and words, we found out better meanings for the words, what they originally meant. Some great sermon stuff comes out of all of these new discoveries. And so around the halfway through mid-century, the founders, or the Lockman Foundation, they wanted to update the version of the Bible. So here we go with the New American Standard Bible, based on the American Standard Version. Some of the cool things with the American Standard Version is it had Jehovah, so Jehovah's Witnesses like that Bible, but they translated the name of God as Jehovah, and but it did also have the thys and the these and the thous, which to me make it sound really biblical. But for daily reading, people want something that more modern translation. So the NASB was fit to do that. In 1995, the NASB was updated, and there's always controversy when anybody updates their Bible, because the people who grew accustomed to the old version, especially the older folks, and I guess I'm getting up there a little bit, older folks, but the older folks go like, I like the way it was. But the younger folks are going, I don't quite get what it's saying as well as if we would update the language. So in 1995, it was updated, and that's the one I use. I use the 1995 update. That's the one I use. So finally, the Lockman Foundation is working on another update. It's been about 25 years now. And so this update is set to be released in 2020. So that's this year. We'll see how that goes. I've been watching, I've been monitoring a little bit about some of the things that they want to change. I'm sure they're going to do fine, going to do a great job. Some constructions that I saw were a little bit strange, but they're getting feedback on that. However, I'll probably stick with the 1995 update for a while, just because that's the one I'm used to right now, and that's the one I like. Moving on here, the source material. All biblical texts have source material. I talked a little bit about why the King James Version used the majority text, or the Textus Receptus, and the manuscripts that back the King James Version of the Bible, which were the best manuscripts at the time, but that was 400 years ago. So fast forward, the modern versions, such as the NASB, use the most up-to-date source material and the most up-to-date scholarship when they go and work on their translation, which means that we're getting closer and closer to what the original meant. We're getting more insight on what the Bible means, and it's really exciting that we can go back in time and in history and rediscover things that we didn't have even 80 years ago. So it's really cool. So the Hebrew of the NASB is the latest edition of Rudolf Kittle's Biblia Hebraica. It's been employed together with the most recent light from lexicography, cognate languages, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, a little word about the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were not around when the Bible was translated into English the first time. And it's a major discovery, especially when we're talking about the Hebrew text. It shed a lot of light on books like Isaiah. And it's just really important that those texts are included in the Hebrew text, because they just add a lot more weight to it. So that's the Hebrew source material. The Greek source material was considered to be given to the latest available manuscripts, so that's the consideration. Was given to the latest available manuscripts with a view to determining the best Greek text. So they're going to be using this. It says in most cases the 26th edition of Eberhard Nessel's Novum Testamentum Grace, which was followed. So they're still looking for the best scholarship available, and the New Testament is really where the scholarship comes to light. I know that there are those out there that believe that more modern versions are being more corrupted because they're using the manuscripts that they're using, but I would take a different approach, and I would say that the manuscripts that we have now for the New Testament are the best that we've ever had, and I think it's great that we have that stuff. And so when I'm using a version of the Bible, I definitely want to use a version of the Bible that takes into consideration everything that's out there. But I still love my King James Version, so there you go. So the translation method, and this is where we get into how Bibles are translated. Everybody seems to like the well, here, everything's done kind of on a scale here. Everybody seems to like the Bibles kind of over on this side of the scale, and they seem to like go, these ones are harder to read, harder to understand, so I'm not so sure I like those. And what do I mean by that? So there's basically 3 camps of Bible translations, and then there's some Bibles that fall kind of in between camps. They're trying to split the difference between them. So the first camp is basically a word-for-word translation of the Bible. Now, the technical term for that is formal equivalence. Formal equivalence is a word-for-word translation of the Bible. Now, for me, it's most important that you have a nice literal version of the Bible. Not too literal, but as literal as you can be. And that means taking one original word and putting the English word that goes with it as best as possible. Tell me when you are going to deviate from that by putting a footnote or something in there that shows me how you've treated the text. That's what I want to know for study. It's kind of like if you're doing brain surgery, you really want to know, right, where everything is going, and it's very particular. And God's word is no less particular than brain surgery in that it's very exact. That's why Jesus said, not one jot or one tittle will remove from these words of the law until, heaven and earth pass away. It's very precise. It's very precise. So word for word, formal equivalence, that's what I like. But, and there is a space for some thought for thought translation of the Bible. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. But that's known as dynamic equivalence. So dynamic equivalence versus formal equivalence. Just think word for word, thought for thought. That means that a thought in the original text is going to be put into a thought in the English text. And this is generally good for idioms. When lots of verses in the Bible say things like, I'll love the Lord with all my heart. But in Hebrew, it'll say bowels, right? And we go like, ooh, that sounds weird. I don't know about that. But the thing is sometimes it's translated in most parts. So some things are changed so that it makes better sense to how we view, how our words view our bodies and things like that. But as for thought, let's say the English phrase, kick the bucket. Oh, he kicked the bucket. So we could put kick the bucket and we could translate that into Spanish maybe, or Russian or something like that. Well, in Spanish and Russian, it probably just means there's a bucket and there's a guy and he's kicking it, right? But in English, it's an idiom. That means that when someone kicks the bucket, right, that means that they've passed away. And that's another euphemism for they have died. Their heart has stopped. They're no longer among the living. There's all these things that we say about when people die. So kick the bucket. In the New Testament, it's they have fallen asleep, right? So that's how it says that someone has died. They have fallen asleep and they're not waking up. So in that case, you could consider using a thought for thought translation so that people know what's going on in the text. And there are those things. So there is some call for thought within the text. For the most part, that's going to be rare. So I like the ones that are formal equivalents versus the thought for thought. That way I can maybe even learn some ancient idioms. There's a whole thing about idioms. I'd love to go into it, but I'm going to stick with the program. Thought for thought. And then finally, the paraphrase. So the paraphrase is basically rephrasing the original. It's a paraphrase when someone says as an author to the Bible, right? The author is God. But if it says like by Eugene Peterson, that is a paraphrase. That is his own rephrasing of the original. That is not a translation whatsoever. Although when I did work at the Christian bookstore, people thought it was, and it was even marketed as such, but it is definitely a paraphrase. Word for word. Now the closest word for word right here, this interlinear, it's basically the Greek or Hebrew word, and then the English word right below it, or a group of English words. Theou means of God, right? But there's only one Greek word, but it translates into 2 English words, right? So that would still be considered word for word. So that's an interlinear. And if you read an interlinear, if you read an interlinear, then it's not going to make as it's not going to make good sense in English, right? Now, when you're studying, that can be helpful. You know, you learn different constructions and things like that. However, for your daily reading study, it's not really ideal. And so then we have the NASB 95. This is the 95 update. It's the one I like. The Amplified, ESV, RSV, King James Version. This is all within the formal equivalence camp. Now, as we move over into thought for thought, which versions fall there? Well, we have the New King James Version, the Holman Christian Standard Bible. So that, I think right now they're calling it the Christian Standard Bible, but it's produced by Holman Publishers. When it first came out, it was called the Holman Christian Standard Bible. So some people still know it as the HCSB, otherwise known as the Southern Baptist Version, right? Because that's who translated it. The NRSV, the New American Bible, which I believe is a Catholic Bible. The NIV, and that's the 2011 update, so NIV 11. When I read an NIV, I prefer the 86 version from 1986. That, to me, is the one that after my King James, I cut my teeth on the NIV, and that's the version I like. The 2011 version, I think they're kind of moving over toward the paraphrase side. They started a little bit more over on the mid-size, and this is why the Holman Christian Standard Bible is a little bit more thought for thought. The NIV used to be right about here, but with these updates, it's kind of moving a little bit more interpretation. And so these are the paraphrases. Now, technically, the New Living Translation is technically a translation, but it is on the farthest end of thought for thought. It's just skirting the paraphrase. The NIRV, the Reader's Version, is definitely some paraphrasing going on because it's limiting the vocabulary for younger readers. Good News, Child Evangelism, the Living Bible, and the Message. So I actually got a Living Bible when I was a small child, and the reason I got the Living Bible is because it was good for children. It was called the Children's Bible, and it was a paraphrase that was done so that children could understand the Bible a little bit better. In fact, it is the precursor to the New Living Translation, right? Because the Living Bible, Living Translation, you see how that works. So it's always tended to be over there. They've actually come this way, and of course, over there on the far end, the Message. So these are translation methods. So that's the one I use, the NASB 95. I'm way over here. I'm on the word for word. I like that. The accuracy, of course, to the original this is a lot higher in the accuracy to the original. And then down here, it's low on the accuracy. What does that mean? And low accuracy is not necessarily bad. That just means that the words in English are not really pairing up well with the words in the original language, but you could still get some meaning out of it, you see. You could still get some meaning out of it. But for my purposes, reading, memorizing, studying, all that stuff, I want to be on this end all the time. I've been traveling, I started out with the King James, then I went to the NIV, and then I have been using the ESV for a while. It seems to be a pretty popular translation, but now I'm like going, no, I'm going to stick with the NASB right now. Let's talk a little bit about the transparency of the text. So that speaks to the features of the New American Standard Version of the Bible. And the features are little clues in the text as to what actually is going on. They'll have an asterisk in the New Testament. You'll see this, and you'll see this little asterisk here, and you look at the bottom of the page, and there's nothing there. It's not for a footnote. It's to denote a specific Greek verb tense, right? The normal typeface that you see is just there. You have to have a normal typeface for those other typefaces to show what's actually there. Pronouns of deity are capitalized, right? And some people like that, some people don't. I could go either way on that. I do like it, but if it doesn't have it, I'm not upset. Small caps. So that's when you have a capital letter there, and then the small letters are also capital letters. It's small caps. So that delineates something in the especially in the New Testament. Well, it's only in the New Testament. To me, it's one of my favorite features. Italics, another one of my favorite features of the NASB is the italics that it's using, and then brackets. So these are some of the features that help you understand what's going on with the text. Now, all of this can be ascertained when you get your Bible and you look and you read through the foreword and the introduction and all those notes. I would encourage you to take your Bible. There's always notes, translation method, why they did what they did. All that information about your Bible is really good information. I know hardly anybody reads it, but I would encourage you to do so. It's just cool. So let's get into some verses. I'm going to show you a little bit about how these features interact with the text. So this is John 13, 3-4. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Some of these words, like forth and girded, you might not be drawn to, but hey, it's there. Just look them up. It's easy. All right, no, it's good. But you'll see that these are little asterisks right here. So what are the asterisks? Well, it's the past present tense, or the present tense in the past. We don't really have a equivalent in English. So it's another way of understanding a verse. The verse 4 would be getting up from supper and laying aside his garments and taking a towel, he girded himself. It's a present tense that happened in the past. Now, Greek is worded in such a way that in order to put you in the scene, they're trying to put you in the scene like you're right there at the supper with Jesus and the disciples. And that's a cool thing to see in the text. And so when you see those little asterisks, you can get that, oh, this is trying to put me into the action. I want to imagine that I'm right there. And that's one of the cool things. I like that so that I can know when the author is trying to pull me in, right? It's a very cool part of the features. And so these next three features, I'm going to show you 1 Peter 2:9. This is one of the verses I use for my basic Bible study method because it's got so much cool stuff going on in it. So let's just get right to it here. But you are a chosen race, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So that's 1 Peter 2:9. So you'll notice here, that's the normal typeface. I know I'm pointing out the obvious. Okay, it's the normal typeface, and that's words that have been translated from the original. Okay, these are the capitalization of the personal pronouns of deity. Excellencies of whom? Him. Who's him? Well, it's God, who has called you out of darkness into whose marvelous light? God's marvelous light, his. So those are capitalized. The pronouns of deity capitalized in the text, and so that kind of lets you know what's going on as far as that goes. Some people will want to figure that out themselves, right? But I think it's a nice feature of the text, and I don't mind it at all. Also, we have, there it is, there's our small caps. What are small caps? One of my favorite features is the small caps. Words or phrases in small caps are words translated from the original language that are quotes from or obvious allusions to the Old Testament. Yes. So when you're looking there, you're seeing when Jesus is quoting from a prophet. You're seeing when Paul is pulling his thoughts out of the Old Testament, and they don't always exactly line up with the words. It doesn't always show up in a keyword search or an internet search. So that's the cool thing about it. There's scholars that said, this comes from there, and this comes from there, and this comes from there, and you get the sense of it, and you can just kind of see we're tying the testaments together. And I like it. I love it, in fact. That's one of my favorite things about it. So, italics. This is another one of my favorite features of the NASB. So these are words that do not occur in the original, but that are supplied so that the verse can be better understood in English. And that just means that, especially in this verse right here, a people for God's own possession. And you can see that it's italicized there. It doesn't show up in the Greek. So, a people for own possession? That doesn't make any sense. Whose possession? Well, we know that this is God's own possession because we have where it's being quoted from, and we can kind of pull together and go, it's talking about God's own possession, but it's not in the original. So that's where the italics comes in. Now, this can come in very important parts where you can have a completely different view of what's going on in the text, right? So the interpreters are letting us know where they put an interpretation in there, and then we can go, and if we want to, we can study that out and see, do we agree with that or not? Should it be there? Can we say it without it? It's another layer of transparency so that you can really see what's going on with the text. So italics, one of my favorite things about the NASB, between the small caps and the italics, those are the two those are the two that really draw me to the version. So moving on to Mark 16:9. Now after he had risen early on the first day of the week, he first appeared to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. So this is where we're going to see an example of brackets. So there's the bracket right there. So when brackets are found within the main body of the text, it indicates that the indicated text may not have occurred in the original writing. It has been included because it has traditionally been a part of the reading, right? So this part of Mark has long been known that it's not in the earliest, most reliable manuscripts. It was in the Textus Receptus, and that's why we have it in the King James Version. But when they went back earlier, they didn't see it. Now, it doesn't mean that it was never there. It's just a little suspect. So when you see something in brackets, you go, great, I believe it was there. Traditionally, it's been part of it. But we're going to put brackets around this because we would like more evidence earlier on in some of those earlier manuscripts. And so that's helpful for me to know about the Bible. You know, the Bible is one of the most well-attested ancient documents of all time. I would say it is the most well-attested ancient documents. It's very historical. You can use it in archaeology. But we are still trying to understand it even more. We're still trying to see if we can make it an even better copy of an ancient manuscript. And so these things within that's because the book is important. We don't do this with other works of antiquity, but we do it with the Bible because it's very important. It's God's word, and we treat it this way. So that's why we put all this stuff in here, and that's why, you know, I really appreciate the translators of the NASB doing stuff like this. Then this is for your average Bible student, average reading. This is for the masses. If I want to really know about what translations and notes and issues, of course, I don't go to the NASB. I dig into the scholarly works. I might look at the Net Bible or things like that, because those are going to give me even more information. But for my daily reading, for my taking to church Bible, for my studying, this is the Bible that I like, for sure. So accessibility. So I just have a few last things to say about this. How accessible is the Greek and Hebrew of the Bible to the modern reader through the NASB? So the goal is to understand the Bible in its original context. Now, I understand when people want to maybe use a Bible like the Message because they feel that it's going to give them better meaning and closer to God, and they feel more connected to God. However, once you move over more into a paraphrase type version of the Bible, you may or may not, you may think you're getting closer to God, when in actuality, that's not what it originally said. That's not what it originally meant. Those nuances that some interpreter has put in there are his interpretation. We need to know what's interpretation and what God's really saying to us. And so that kicks me back to the as much word for word as I can muster. And so in order to understand the Bible in its original context, this version of the Bible makes that very accessible. The more that the Bible is interpreted, the further it moves from its original form, and sometimes even its original message, right? People have ideas. I mean, humans look at the text and they read it a certain way and they think it's perfectly legitimate and correct. However, there's a little bit of a theological slant or a coloring of the text toward a certain viewpoint, right? And so I want to move as far on this side of the scale, the word for word scale, because that tends to eliminate those things. Now, it doesn't eliminate it altogether. However, you know, I want to be on this side rather than those other ones that make you think that you understand a little bit better. And that's their goal, obviously. They're just not as literal. So I do like the literal end. I'll say one thing at the end of this about any Bible translation, just so we can clear up some confusion. I believe the NASB is the best at translating the original languages into English. For the modern English reader, I mean, it is a little bit of step up. I mean, blame our education system if you need to look up too many words. You know, people were educated to that point at one point in time. This might be college level at this point in time, but actually I think most of them I see are 11th grade reading level for NASB, or maybe it's 10th through 11th. But I don't know. I don't know. But if you really want to know the Bible and the closest to the original language in English, I think the NASB is a good translation for that. So that means that using the NASB is the next best thing to learning Greek and Hebrew. I would encourage you to learn Greek and Hebrew. That it's going to open up worlds for you when you learn Greek and Hebrew, or listen to someone who knows it and learn as much as you can about what the original meaning of the words was behind the text, because there's just so much good stuff. I mean, when you read the Bible in English, you're skimming the surface. Truly, you're skimming the surface. That being said, how much do you need to understand in order to actually, be a believer, follow the Lord, be encouraged, have a devotional life? And I would say any of the modern translations are going to get you down the road in that direction. Even if you started with the Message, if that's your step up, great, right? That will give you a jumping off point to start moving down this scale. So if you're using a version kind of on this end, don't go like, well, I can't read these other versions because this one's easy for me to understand, and these ones are hard. Just start moving down the line. Maybe get some parallel versions. Maybe that's going to up your intelligence. You'll be able to follow God with any of the versions. I hesitate on the Message. I wouldn't want a new believer just reading the Message and thinking that they know, right? I believe the Message does need to be paired with something, even the New Living Translation. However, you will be able to follow the Lord no matter what translation that you use. However, the more that you can come this way, right, the better off you're going to be, the more knowledgeable you're going to be, and it's just all around better. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my take on why I like the NASB. I like it for me the best. I would encourage you to take a look at it, see what you think. I'll be doing some more videos about how to do cross-referencing and all this other stuff. Very cool stuff. So if you'd like to see that kind of stuff, go ahead and give me a comment below. We always appreciate likes on the channel. I try and get through every comment that comes in. I try to respond either with a like or another message. And of course, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Get all your bell notifications so that you won't miss anything that comes out, because there's going to be more free Bible training, Bible reviews, all this good stuff is going to be coming out, so you don't want to miss that. Before I leave, I always like to shoot this out there just because I think it's a good thing to do. And I would like to say, may the Lord bless you. May the Lord guard and protect you. May he make his face to shine upon you, and may he lift up his countenance to you and grant you peace. Have a wonderful day, and God bless.